Have you ever felt the world shift? Because of someone you barely knew? Claire Matthews had lived many quiet years in her small suburban home. Her days were predictable: morning coffee, work emails, laundry, evening dinners. She was 43, graceful but tired, carrying the invisible weight of years gone by too quickly. Her son, Ethan, was her pride, her reason for moving forward after her husband's departure years ago. But something inside her had grown silent. Her laughter, her curiosity, the part of her that once dreamed. It was all buried under routine, until one ordinary afternoon, everything began to change. Sometimes the most ordinary invitation carries an extraordinary spark. It started when Ethan walked through the front door with Daniel, his closest friend from college. Claire had heard the name before. Ethan often mentioned late-night study sessions, basketball games, and how Daniel helped him with tough assignments. But she had never met him in person. She expected a casual hello, a polite smile, and nothing more. When she opened the door and saw him, her breath caught. Daniel was tall, with an easy smile that warmed the room, yet his eyes carried something deeper, an attentiveness that made her feel unexpectedly seen. He wasn't the loud, restless kind of college kid she had imagined. He was calm, polite, and when he shook her hand, his grip was firm but gentle. "Mom, this is Daniel," Ethan said casually, dropping his bag by the sofa. "It's so nice to finally meet you," Daniel replied, his voice steady, respectful. Claire smiled politely. "It's good to meet you, too. You boys must be hungry." They settled in the living room, laughter bouncing off the walls. Claire watched them from the kitchen, preparing snacks. Daniel's laughter filled the space with warmth. Every so often, his eyes drifted toward her, not in a disrespectful way, but with a quiet focus that made her feel aware of herself in a way she hadn't in years. She brushed it off. He was just being polite. But what if kindness feels a little too personal? When she walked back with a tray of tea and cookies, Daniel immediately stood to help her. Most young men would stay seated, but he reached out, took the tray from her hands, and carefully placed it on the table. "Thank you," Claire said softly. "A bit surprised?" "Of course," he replied, with a smile that lingered a moment too long. They sipped tea, exchanging stories. Ethan talked about classes, sports, the usual chatter of a college kid. But Daniel kept asking Claire questions. What books she liked, what music she listened to, even about her garden outside. It wasn't small talk. He was listening with full attention, his gaze steady, his expression thoughtful. She answered politely, but inside, her heart fluttered at the rare sensation of being noticed. Not just as someone's mom, but as a person. Ethan laughed and teased her at one point. "Mom, don't bore Daniel with your gardening stories." Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, I actually think it's interesting. You must have a lot of patience to grow something from nothing." The room fell quiet for a second, and Claire felt something shift inside her. Patience. Growing from nothing. Words that carried more meaning than he probably realized. But the heart notices details the mind tries to ignore. She tried to steady herself, reminding her heart of reality. Daniel was Ethan's age. He was just a guest, nothing more. Yet as the afternoon unfolded, she caught the way his eyes softened whenever she laughed, the way he leaned in slightly when she spoke, as if each word mattered. At one point, she excused herself to the kitchen, needing a breath away from the strange tension. As she rinsed the cups, she scolded herself silently. This was ridiculous. She was imagining things. But even as she tried to dismiss it, her heart betrayed her with a quiet rush of warmth she hadn't felt in years. From the kitchen doorway, she saw Daniel glance after her, his expression thoughtful. He quickly turned back to Ethan, pretending nothing had happened. But Claire noticed, and the noticing unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The smallest moments often reveal the biggest truths. Time slipped quickly. They talked, laughed, and before long, Ethan's phone buzzed. "Coach is calling. I'll be right back," he said, stepping into the backyard to take the call. The house fell silent. Only Claire and Daniel remained at the table. She expected awkwardness, but Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, softer. "Mrs. Matthews," he began, and for the first time, He wasn't smiling. His eyes were serious, searching hers. "I hope this doesn't sound strange, but you remind me of someone I once cared about deeply." Her chest tightened. The words were gentle, but the way he said them, careful, almost reverent, sent a quiet shock through her. She swallowed hard, her voice caught between caution and curiosity. "Oh, and who might that be?" But before he could answer, they heard the sound of footsteps returning. Ethan was coming back inside. Daniel leaned back quickly, his smile returning as if nothing had happened. Claire's heart pounded. She tried to appear calm as Ethan rejoined them, but inside, everything had shifted. That single sentence, spoken in a quiet living room over half-empty teacups, had cracked open a door she thought was sealed shut forever. As Ethan sat down again, laughing about his coach's instructions, Claire forced herself to smile, though her thoughts were far away. Daniel's words echoed in her chest, louder than Ethan's laughter, louder than the clinking of teacups. "You remind me of someone I once cared about deeply." She didn't know what he meant, but she knew one thing. Nothing in her life would feel the same after that moment. What happens when an innocent remark carries too much meaning? Claire couldn't sleep that night. Daniel's words kept replaying in her mind like a record she couldn't stop. "You remind me of someone I once cared about deeply." It was a simple sentence, maybe harmless, but why did it linger in her heart? Why did it feel like a whisper meant only for her? She turned on her side, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, trying to convince herself she was overthinking. But deep down, she knew. Something had shifted. But how do you ignore a voice that won't leave your head? The next morning, Claire forced herself into routine. Coffee brewed, the radio played softly, sunlight poured in through the kitchen window. Ethan sat at the table, scrolling his phone, while Daniel joined them, looking fresh and calm as if nothing unusual had happened yesterday. "Thanks again for tea, Mrs. Matthews," Daniel said warmly. Her heart jumped at the sound of his voice. She smiled politely, trying to act unaffected. "Of course. You're always welcome." But the words felt heavier than she intended. She glanced at Ethan. He didn't notice. Relief washed over her, though her chest remained unsettled. As the morning went on, she caught Daniel looking at her once or twice, quickly shifting his gaze whenever Ethan turned his head. It was subtle, quiet, almost invisible, but she noticed, and noticing made her restless. The heart betrays itself in the smallest stolen seconds. Later that day, while cleaning the kitchen, Claire heard faint voices drifting from the hallway. Ethan and Daniel were talking near the front door. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their words carried into the kitchen like whispers meant for her ears. Ethan laughed. "Man, you look like you didn't sleep." "What's up?" Daniel hesitated, then answered, his voice softer. "Your mom. She's different. She has this calmness, like she sees people really sees them. I wish I had someone like that in my life." Claire froze, her heart hammering. She gripped the edge of the counter, afraid to breathe too loudly. Daniel's words weren't playful. They weren't casual. They were raw, honest, too close to the truth she had been trying to avoid. Ethan laughed again, not realizing the weight of what was said. "Yeah, that's just my mom. She's always like that." But Claire knew it wasn't just anything. Daniel had felt something, and hearing it made her knees weak. She shouldn't have listened. She shouldn't have cared, yet she did. When a single moment changes the rhythm of your heart, you can't return to silence. That evening, after Ethan drove Daniel back to campus, Claire stayed behind in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes that were already clean. She tried to shake off the words, tried to tell herself Daniel was young, confused, probably just grateful for her kindness. But no matter how she argued with herself, a quiet warmth lingered in her chest. It wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. The night stretched long. She folded laundry, checked emails, watered plants, anything to distract her restless mind. Yet every distraction circled back to the same thought. He noticed me. Not as Ethan's mom, not as a background figure, but as someone. And then her phone buzzed. But what do you do when the past day refuses to end? She picked it up from the counter. A new message. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the words froze her breath. "Thank you for today. Can we talk again? Just you and me?" Claire stared at the glowing screen. Her hand trembled. Her first instinct was to delete it, pretend it never arrived. This was dangerous, wrong, a line she had no business crossing. She reminded herself, he was Ethan's friend, a guest, practically family. But the longer she stared at the message, the stronger the temptation grew. Because beneath all the logic, her heart whispered the truth she couldn't ignore. She wanted to feel alive again. And Daniel had awakened that part of her. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She told herself she'd just reply politely, nothing more. Of course, but only as friends. She typed the words slowly, then stopped, deleting them. She tried again. Sure, it was nice talking. Simple, harmless. But even those words carried weight she couldn't control. Her finger tapped send. The message left. The hardest part of temptation isn't saying yes. It's pretending you said no. Minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Daniel's reply came quickly, almost too quickly. Tomorrow? I can stop by after class. Just a quick talk. Her heart pounded. She closed her eyes, torn between fear and curiosity. She knew she should refuse. She knew silence was safer. Yet something inside her longed to hear his voice again, to sit across from him without the noise of others, without the safe cover of small talk. She didn't answer right away. She placed the phone face down, as if hiding it would silence the storm inside her. But the silence only made the storm louder. Finally, with a deep breath, she picked up the phone again. Her reply was short. All right. Just for a little while. She pressed send. The decision was made. Claire sat alone in the darkened kitchen, the glow of her phone the only light. Her heart raced with both dread and anticipation. She had opened a door she wasn't sure she could close. Tomorrow Daniel would return. And this time, it wouldn't be the same. When the line between right and wrong blurs. What do you do? Claire waited the next day with her heart in knots. She had told herself over and over again that Daniel's visit would be innocent, nothing to worry about. But the truth was, she had agreed because a part of her longed for it. That longing scared her more than anything else. She kept busy in the kitchen, setting out cups, moving things around, trying to distract herself from the sound of every ticking second. Sometimes the longest wait is just a few minutes before the storm. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Claire jumped slightly, her breath quick. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. Daniel stood there, casual but thoughtful, holding a book in his hand. Hey, he said softly, almost too softly, as if careful not to disturb the silence of the house. Ethan isn't home, Claire said quickly, her voice firmer than she meant it to be. Daniel nodded. I know. I came for you. Her chest tightened. She should have sent him away, closed the door, reminded him of boundaries. But instead, she stepped aside, letting him in. Some conversations don't start with words. They start with silence. They sat across from each other in the living room. The book he carried rested on the table. Claire folded her hands tightly to keep them steady. What did you want to talk about? She asked, her tone careful, her eyes focused anywhere but his. Daniel leaned forward. Yesterday. When I said you reminded me of someone, I wasn't making small talk. His voice was quiet but steady. She was the only person who ever understood me. Losing her, it left a hole. And yesterday, sitting here, listening to you, I felt that same comfort again. Claire's throat tightened. She should have stopped him. She should have reminded him that she was Ethan's mother, that she was years older, that this was impossible. But instead, she sat frozen, caught between reason and the unexpected rush of being needed. You're kind, Daniel, she finally whispered, but you're young. You don't understand what you're saying. His gaze deepened. I do. And I mean every word. The truth you run from always finds a way to sit beside you. The air grew heavier with every passing second. Claire tried to redirect the conversation, asking about his studies, his plans, his friends, but no matter where the words wandered, they always circled back to something unspoken. Daniel wasn't here for books or advice. He was here because he saw her as more than Ethan's mother. And the cruelest part? She didn't hate it. She felt alive, even in her guilt. "Daniel," she said firmly at last, "this cannot go anywhere. You understand that, don't you?" His expression softened, but his eyes held a quiet defiance. "I understand the rules, but feelings don't always follow rules." Her heart skipped. She turned her head, unable to meet his gaze. Every word he spoke pulled her closer to a place she had no business stepping into. The line between silence and confession is thinner than we think. The minutes stretched, heavy and fragile. Daniel leaned back, his hand brushing the book on the table. He smiled faintly. "I brought this for you. It's one of my favorites. Thought you might like it." Claire hesitated before picking it up. It wasn't just a book. It was a gesture, something personal, something he wanted her to hold on to. She clutched it gently, her eyes betraying her calm voice. "Thank you." Their gazes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. The air spoke louder than either of them dared to. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She stood up, trying to end the conversation, to create space before she drowned in emotions she couldn't contain. But Daniel rose too, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't push me away like I'm just some kid. I don't see you that way." Her breath caught. She wanted to argue, to push back, to remind him of all the reasons why this was wrong. But the words refused to form. Her silence spoke louder than any excuse. The danger isn't always in action. Sometimes it's in the silence before it. Daniel's eyes held hers, unflinching. "I don't see you as Ethan's mom," he said slowly. "I see you as someone I could lose myself in." Her heart raced wildly, torn between panic and a strange, forbidden thrill. She should have walked away. She should have ended it there. But instead, she stood frozen, staring back at him, her lips trembling with words she couldn't say. And then, the front door creaked open. Footsteps. Voices, Ethan's voice. "Mom, I'm back." Claire's blood ran cold. Daniel stepped back instantly, his face turning neutral, as if nothing had happened. But the weight in the air didn't disappear. It lingered, thick and undeniable. Ethan stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked between them. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone sharp, suspicious. Claire's heart stopped. She glanced at Daniel, who remained calm but silent. Ethan's gaze moved from her face to Daniel's, waiting for an answer. The room was heavy with unspoken truths, and Claire knew. Whatever happened next would change everything. Sometimes love doesn't come when you expect it, but when you fear it most. The living room felt like it was holding its breath. Ethan stood frozen by the door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes darting between his mother and his friend. Claire's heart raced, her palms damp. Daniel looked calm, but Claire could see the tension in his jaw. Nothing had happened, no words too far, no touch too close. But the weight of what almost did hung heavy in the air. Silence can be louder than the truth you're afraid to speak. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What's going on here?" His voice was casual on the surface, but Claire knew her son too well. He was suspicious. Claire forced a laugh, though her throat was tight. "Nothing at all. Daniel just dropped by. He forgot his notebook yesterday." Daniel nodded quickly, picking up the book he had brought. "Yeah, that's all." But Ethan didn't look convinced. He studied them both, as if trying to catch what lay beneath their words. Finally, he shrugged, though his expression remained guarded. "All right. I'm going to my room." He walked past them, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Claire exhaled shakily, relief mixing with dread. The storm hadn't hit, but it hovered close. Even when danger passes, the heart doesn't calm. It only waits. Daniel turned back to her, his face filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to put you in this position." Claire swallowed, her voice barely steady. "Daniel, this has to stop. For Ethan's sake. For your sake. For mine." His eyes softened with sadness, but not surrender. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "But please, believe me when I say my feelings are real. I don't want to cause trouble. I couldn't hide it anymore." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to forget it, to erase this entire afternoon. But the truth was, she couldn't erase it either. His words had carved themselves into her heart. Daniel gave her one last look, deep, lingering, filled with things neither of them dared to speak aloud. Then he left, the door closing softly behind him. The hardest part isn't saying goodbye. It's living with what lingers. That night, the house was quiet, but Claire could feel Ethan's silence from his room upstairs. He hadn't joined her for dinner. He hadn't asked questions. But she knew her son's silence well. It wasn't ignorance. It was suspicion. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched plate of food across from her. Her phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "I'm sorry. But I meant what I said. If I never see you again, I need you to know that." Her fingers trembled as she held the phone. She wanted to reply, to tell him his words had stirred something in her she thought was long gone, but she also knew the cost. Her son's trust, her own peace, the fragile balance of her home. She placed the phone face down, tears welling in her eyes. She couldn't answer. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The heart doesn't break with one choice. It breaks with the silence that follows. Days turned into weeks. Daniel didn't come around anymore. Ethan never mentioned him, though the tension in the house told Claire he had noticed more than he let on. The space Daniel once filled with his laughter was now an empty echo in her memory. Claire went about her days as before. Work, chores, routine. But something inside her had changed. She felt both awakened and hollow, as if a part of her had been touched and then taken away too quickly. One afternoon, as she sat in her garden pulling weeds, Ethan finally spoke. He stood in the doorway watching her with guarded eyes. "Mom," he said slowly. "Was something going on with Daniel?" Her heart stopped. She looked up at her son, her throat tightening. "No," she whispered firmly. "Nothing happened." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good." His voice was low, almost disappointed, as if he had hoped for an answer he never got. He turned away, leaving her with the ache of half-truths. Some stories don't end with answers. They end with what's left unsaid. Claire knew she had done the right thing by choosing silence. Protecting Ethan mattered more than anything, but late at night, when the house was quiet, her mind wandered. She remembered Daniel's eyes, his words, the way he made her feel seen in a way no one had in years. It wasn't love. It couldn't be. It was a passing storm, intense but fleeting, and yet, storms leave marks, even after the sky clears. As she lay in bed, her phone glowed on the nightstand. She didn't touch it. She didn't open the messages still sitting there, but she couldn't erase them either. Claire turned off the light, the room falling into darkness. Her son slept upstairs, safe and unaware of the storm in her heart. Daniel was gone, maybe forever. But as she closed her eyes, one thought refused to leave her. What if some feelings are meant to stay unspoken? Because speaking them would change everything? And with that question echoing in her chest, Claire realized her story with Daniel wasn't truly over. Not yet.